name is Will Wilkinson. You're listening to Thriving in Business and Life.
And I'm Christopher Harding, and we're going to pick up and continue a conversation about assessment. Will, I think it's a tremendously discussed topic because vision is real popular. Everybody likes to talk about vision.
Well, sure, it's exciting, and you can get all pumped up about some vision.
Right. And you know, a lot of times what happens is we lose sight of the vision in the process of going forward. And so we've been talking about assessment in our lovely office here in downtown Ashland.
Where we can hear the trucks roaring by. This is life.
and so, you know, this process of assessment, we're going to take one more week on this because we found that with our clients, it is probably one of the most underdeveloped skills that many leaders and managers have.
Right. I kind of refer to it as practical visioning, where the vision isn't some huge, vision of possibilities completely unrelated to reality, but the vision and the assessment of what's going on, are linked together.
Right, and that vision and assessment are an ongoing process. I think one of the things we talk about in the assessment chapter in the book, but I wanted to just kind of pick your brain a little bit because I know you have some really interesting ways of describing this process between having the vision, doing the assessment without losing sight of the vision.
Right. Well, I think it begins with respecting both of them and acknowledging what our preference is. Some of us are steeped in the way things are, and visioning is like, do I have time for that? Others of us really like the visionary part, and we get bothered by facing the details.
So let's say that I'm facing the details. I guess any tips for our listeners on how to not lose sight of the vision when we're going back and assessing, because assessment kind of needs to be an ongoing process.
Absolutely, because everything's changing. Well, I think the simple tip is to leverage the imagination. We're actually using different parts of the brain. So the question, very simple question that I use when I want to shift from kind of logistically analyzing the assessment part of things to getting into the vision is, what if?
Right.
What if things were working better? What if sales weren't in the toilet? What if the relationships between these two teams were better? Just asking the question, and then I think this is important, to not expect an immediate answer. To live in the question. I think that's one of the keys.
Well, and part of it in doing an assessment when you're doing a what if is then start to describe, well, so how would we be behaving? What would we be doing? What would we be saying? What wouldn't we be saying, right? So that we can start to measure behavior that's consistent with the vision.
Well, exactly.
With where we are.
Yeah, you're putting your finger on something really important, Chris, because it isn't just about doing. You know, our focus tends to be on, well, what should we do? It's about being. It's about who we are. So we can add another question. Who would I need to be? Or
right.
Who would we need to be to achieve the results we want?
Yeah.
Now, that's a very interesting question, because when I ask that question of myself, when I'm doing this exact process, inevitably I come up with some clues about personal changes that I need to make in my attitudes, my behaviors, if I really genuinely want to have a hope of creating that new result. You know, Einstein said that doing the same thing and expecting a different result is one of the definitions of insanity.
Right. Well, and you know, if we kind of tie all this together, we've talked about the power of story. And so what's the story I'm making up about assessment? What's the story I'm making up about the need to change if assessment shows me that we need to realign better with the vision? You know, what are the biases I might have about change, about assessment, you know, and then looking at our values, which is really what the vision should be based on.
Well, exactly. And another principle, which is so powerful as we're learning this new process, is my choices make a difference.
Yeah.
That's huge, right. Because often we feel disempowered.
Well, exactly. And my choices might simply be my attitude and how I decide I'm going to respond to things.
Right. And there's a couple of layers of value to that. One is it gets me off my butt to actually do something, however small, but it infects other people. They can feel that we're now hopeful. They can begin to feel a little more hopeful themselves.
Right, yeah. Understanding that we have a ripple effect. And one of the things I know when we first started talking about this book and even looking at how we were assessing our clients, we came up with an assessment of how different clients are in the category, kind of 4 different categories
I
of
remember
clients.
this. Yeah, I mean, it helps to tell the truth.
Right, and part of it was, the one client, maybe they feel like, hey, listen, we're doing fine. We don't need any help. Thank you very much. And they might be.
Well, and that's not a completely closed door. I mean, if a salesperson, has that response, they might be inclined to say, well, forget him or her.
Right.
Well, what do we do in that situation?
Again, what's the story I make up about that? What do I make that mean?
Exactly. The one thing we can do is just build a relationship.
Right.
All of us know of work that has come our way, sometimes years after a first contact, that seemed totally fruitless.
Well, and it's I remember advice from my father when I was raising my boys in their younger years, and he said, remember, the primary thing never to lose sight of is the relationship you have with them.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with a client, or a prospective client, as we might call them, that, our relationship with them is very often what will have them possibly begin to open a door for us. The next one really is we find somebody who's in crisis. They're, in emergency, and they're very clear on the fact that they need help. Please help. Now, that can be supposedly an easy entry into helping a client, but so often it's not. Sometimes it's a missed opportunity. What do you notice is what happens when we miss the opportunity of somebody actually needing our help?
Well, I can speak from my own embarrassing history where I've really missed on this one. I just have to confess, because I tend to be a big thinker. So someone has got an emergency, they ask me for help. Where I failed them is I start sketching out some big strategy, that I see could be wonderful. They're going, well, my pipes are leaking. I just need to fix the leak. So I think one thing we need to pay attention to here is a dual approach. Starting with a short-term fix may need a Band-Aid to staunch the bleeding.
Right.
Adding in the big picture, but doing it in the right order. And there's an art to that. You got to weave both together.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. The plumbing metaphor is one that's particularly poignant for me right now since our house was flooded.
Sorry to bring that up.
So the interesting thing about that, I know I've talked about, I think on this program and in our book, a mentor I had named Kellerstrass. And his whole thing was to ask great questions. When he found that somebody really needed help, what he genuinely wanted to find out was, what was the problem? He wanted to understand it so that he could then make an assessment and decide what would be a short-term fix to handle the most urgent aspects of it, and then what are the longer-term elements of this that we need to work on, and then to create a timeline accordingly.
Well, you're reminding me of an experience I had many years ago when I was working in a international educational nonprofit network, and I was in one of the training centers, and the guy who was in charge of maintenance left, and he put me in charge, which probably was a really bad choice. And the tradition there was that people had a list of things that needed to be repaired. And some of the items on the list were like years old, and there was a lot of discontent about the way things weren't being done. Well, then people would put things on the list like today. And my attitude was, well, this is urgent, I'll fix this. And some people were thrilled. Great, I put it on, it's fixed in a day. Other people were, how come this got a priority over the thing that I've had on the list for 2 years? Well, and I had to learn how to balance the priorities there.
Well, and making the distinction between urgent, and important, and that's an easy one during an assessment to get tripped up on. There's another category too that we find clients in where problems are showing up, but they tend to have a culture and a way of doing business that they kind of almost see them before they happen. They can see something's about to happen, and so they're ready to take action. What is it, from your standpoint, that distinguishes the client who tends to be almost ahead of the curve versus the one who tends to be more reactive?
Well, it marks a shift in stance from our perspective as consultants. in the first instance, we're providing kind of an expert view and advice. In this instance, we're going to build a team, their team.
Right.
They're already on it. And so our appreciation for the steps they've taken, our appreciation for their willingness to see the signs and choose to spend money and time on preventing a disaster, that's really big. So in the first instance, we're kind of in charge. In this instance, they're really in charge. We're consulting on their own team building.
Right, yeah. The dynamics of what we're focusing on are very different. And it's interesting to me that all of these two we've just described are very different aspects of assessment. Assessing something after it's already happened versus catching it up front before it happens. And that's, of course, where we're always trying to coach people toward, is to be able to look far enough downstream to where they can anticipate what's going to be a challenge and actually start to prepare for it before it happens.
Well, and I think a goal here is to create a culture where there's no need for whistleblowers.
Wow, wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, I mean, imagine you're running a business and you feel content. You go to sleep at night knowing that there aren't big problems brewing that people are ignoring, that someone might call out, because you're preempting all that.
It's interesting. I was just coaching a friend who's going through a situation at her work environment, and what's happened is that there are some of the leaders are basically blaming things on other people. And
how novel. Never heard of that before, Chris.
And they're actually proactive about it. so the what she did was she went in and talked with somebody level up from her and said, "Hey, this is happening. It's a problem." And their response was, "Oh, I can't believe that so-and-so would do something like that. You must be mistaken." Right. Now, part of an assessment, mindset is that we're willing to take feedback from wherever it comes and be aware that apparently the halo effect was in place with this person that she brought up a concern about, because they not only see in their mind that this was possible, they were unwilling to even consider it. Right. And so the halo effect and different biases can really get in the way of our making a true and accurate assessment.
Well, it's true, and I think there's room here to be clever, to be strategic. Okay. Because let's say I'm in a situation like that. Well, I probably know the halo effect is in happening, right?
That's a really good point, because she kind of thought it would be, but she was willing to take the risk anyway. And one of the things I was coaching her on was that her reaction to the fact that, yep, the halo effect is in place. Okay, nothing I can do about it.
Well, yeah, and on the other side of that coin, to try and fight it, to expose it. Well, you always treat him differently than you treat everybody else, or, that doesn't work. So in that situation where the person who's bringing the quote-unquote bad news is aware of a halo effect, they could then defer to the issue rather than the person.
Right.
Using their language to focus on the results in the organization rather than making it so personal. Instead of, Jim refuses to listen to me and I've told him 6 times. Well, Jim is the boss's brother-in-law, right? This is not going to go well. So instead of kind of wading into a conflict like that, being aware of it and then being clever and strategic and going, I'm going to focus on the outcome, the results. And that's where there's going to be more leverage.
Yeah, that's one of the things I told her, is just focus on the facts and the implication, or the outcome of what these are going to create. And maybe he has to discover for himself that his halo effect is in place. But if the evidence is clear enough, not from an accusatory standpoint, but simply from the place of, hey, this is happening and I'm concerned about where it's going to lead. Right. She seems to be so open that I'm hopeful that she'll, dive into that.
Well, another aspect of this, and again, I learned this the hard way, is to be very fluid with our communication style depending on who we're with.
Right.
Because it's easy to, especially when we're passionate about something. We can get blinded to the fact that our approach may really raise hackles in whoever it is we're trying to get on our side.
Well, and it's interesting because we were talking about attitude just a minute ago, and attitude really is something that's transmitted on more than just a verbal level.
Mm-hmm.
People feel it in the tone of our voice.
Exactly.
They see it in the expression on our face. There's things that are maybe unmeasurable that people pick up on with attitude. So part of what I had coached her about too was be careful that your own bias about this person you're complaining about isn't leaking through, and maybe you need to consider that your story about why they did that is just your story. Right. So focus on the facts. And
well, just to add to that, back to my recollection of working in this conference center, I was second in command, and the head guy, the head director, good friend of mine, very different style from me. I was kind of a shoot from the hip, innovative, fresh thinking guy, and he was very conservative and a great guy, but just we had very different personalities. Well, I learned about this at a seminar we did on personality types, and I realized that it was inevitable that he and I would have conflict with the way I was relating to him. So I tried an experiment the next time we had some thorny issue to discuss. Instead of coming to him and saying, "Dave, I've got a great idea." I mean, his reflex was, "Oh, yeah? Let's see about that."
I remember you talking about this.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah.
So instead, I just adjusted and said, "Dave, something's come up. I'm not sure if there's any value to it.
Right.
See what you think."
Yeah.
Put him in the position of needing to take the lead on being the innovator, which it turned out he really enjoyed doing.
The thing that where we're really leading to is kind of the fourth category we see with clients, and that is that they are ahead of the game. They're proactive. They're very skilled at looking downstream, and they have things well under control. And unlike the first category, with everything's fine, we don't need any help, everything's fine, and we're looking for the next best thing. We want to improve. We want to grow. That's a very different place. They're doing well, and they know it, but they're not satisfied. They want to continue to grow and improve.
Well, this is like being ahead of the curve. You're not behind the 8 ball, you're ahead of the curve because you're not battling forces to resist change. You've got a strong foundation, and you're using that to blast off into new areas. Completely different dynamic.
Yeah, one of our clients...
Who would want to work at a company like that?
Well, yeah.
Great people.
Exactly. And one of our clients actually made the distinction of saying, we're not chasing the leading edge. We want to be the leading edge.
Exactly. What a difference. I was just talking with one of the co-founders of Zappos. He happened to be in town a while back. And he mentioned that at Zappos, they have every new hire spend 3 weeks training in customer service. Now, these are people who may not even have anything to do with customers. They want them all to be trained in what Zappos' primary thing is, which is great customer service. At the end of that training, for which they're paid, the new hires are offered $4,000 if they want to quit.
I know. I love that. Isn't
that something?
Yeah.
$4,000 if they want to quit. Why? Why would they do that? Well, they want to weed out the people who feel that $4,000 is more valuable than working at Zappos. And Fred Mosler, his name is, told us that only about 2% of the new hires take the $4,000.
That's wild. Well, I guess if you were really cut out for it and you had the heart and mindset that they're looking for there, you'd be so happy to have found a place that is going to allow you to show up that way, that $4,000 would be a paltry sum. Right.
Right, and it works for them on the bottom line. It creates a better company.
Well, but what it is the cost of putting people into position and having them not perform and so on is extreme. So that's brilliant. I'd be curious to see if more people would adopt that strategy.
Well, this is the thing about human nature. We're so stubborn. We can be staring at something that works. I mean, like in the real world. It works. Dollars and cents, it's more profitable. And yet, if it's fundamentally at odds with our well-established beliefs, we can ignore it.
Yeah. Well, it's like, we talked about the halo effect, we've talked about biases, we've talked about the story, and the whole, phenomenon of brain blindness, that if I don't believe something is, good, I won't see the value of it even when it's there. Or if I believe that change is too difficult or that what we have is great, I won't look for even greater.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you wrote something, I seem to remember this being your sentence from the book, that this takes us right into, nothing inhibits progress like apathetic self-satisfaction. That's a very pithy term. That could be a poster. So say a little more about that.
Well, I mean, I found this in myself. I mean, that's probably the first place I leaned it. That's probably the first place I learned it. And what I was really, I think, focusing on is having seen this in myself and others where we become self-satisfied that we're doing well. Mm-hmm. And that there's kind of almost a pride that boils up that's not a healthy pride. It's a, aren't we cool?
Yeah.
You know, and look at us.
Self-congratulatory, resting on our laurels.
Yeah, exactly. And thinking that we're all that in a bag of chips, as the saying goes. And to me, that's
I've never heard that.
You haven't?
I really like that. All that and a bag of chips. Okay.
Yeah. So
it's like all this and $4 buys you a cup of coffee.
That's right. It's just that whole sense that we've arrived. And it's a dangerous place to be because we're very vulnerable to blind spots at that point.
Yeah.
And we're very vulnerable to, if we are on the leading edge, we're very vulnerable to losing the leading edge by being in that place of, self-satisfaction. Now, that doesn't mean we don't celebrate. That doesn't mean we're not happy about what we're doing. But it means that we don't start to, puff ourselves up about it and lose sight of the very heart and soul of what got us to that place in the first place.
Well, one thing we did in our book was to try and spell these things out in a clear way, making the distinction between surviving and thriving. And an innovative way we did that in the chapter we're referencing right now kind of relates to our background in the film and television industry, above the line and below the line. Do you want to just give us a little preamble so we understand that? And then I'd love you to recite the above the line version, then I'll follow with the below the line.
Well, so the above the line in film and television are all of the costs that are associated with, like the producer, the story rights, sometimes the director, the creative aspects, you could say, in some regard, or the talent, as it's sometimes referred to. And below the line are all of the people involved in the actual implementation. So the camera crew, the camera gear itself, and all of the various elements that it takes to make a film or a television program or bring it to light. Well, in this case, this comes out of the book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. They make an interesting distinction between above and below the line, which is a little different, and it lines up kind of interesting with our own power scale. So in above the line, my attitude would be I commit to taking full responsibility for the circumstances of my life, for my physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being, and I commit to supporting others to take full responsibility for their lives. So that's a 10 on the power scale, the way we utilize it. That's just really living a life of responsibility.
Well, let me do the below the line one, which is very different, and I think all of us can relate to this, but hopefully in the past. Below the line, I commit to being a victim, villain, or hero, and taking more or less than 100% responsibility.
So I think we can understand what taking less than 100% responsibility is. Taking more than 100% responsibility means I start to become codependent. I start to take other people's responsibility and make it my own.
Right. That's could be conceivably as much of a problem.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. And in a way, I mean, we were talking about, a person I was coaching, and she was trying to correct a situation. Now, if that's impacting her and her team, absolutely she should be dealing with that. If it's something she's observing that's not directly impacting her and she starts to involve herself in it, that could actually be where she's crossed the line and is taking more than the appropriate share of responsibility for fixing something that's not in her scope. She can certainly maybe pull that person aside and invite them to consider the possibility, but getting herself all enrolled in that could actually be, over responsibility.
Right, and on the other hand, the creative part of kind of digging deeper and getting involved is what we call going upstream.
Right.
Where, on the one hand, you're dealing with what's going on. We spoke about this a moment ago, the emergency, the situation as it is.
Right.
But not leaving it at that. Also, as we say, going upstream to learn the causes. Why is this happening so we can prevent that upstream?
Yeah, getting up enough ahead of the situation or problem to deal with it. And then from there, looking at the downstream vantage point. And this is an aspect that we learned in terms of people's cognitive skills, is we are just not taught very often in our life, and almost never in school, to really follow the bouncing ball and say, what are going to be the ripple effects of this? If I do this, where's it going to lead? If I do that, where's it going to lead? And making an informed choice that way.
Right, and it comes to a moment of decision of, okay, I'm not going to quit handling the emergencies, putting out the fires, but I'm going to add in this other way of thinking. I think sometimes it's seen as an either or.
Right.
We're going to do one thing or do the other. No, we do both things.
Well, and when we were talking about even whether I'm in a blame mindset or an ownership mindset, we all tend to fall off the wagon, so to speak. And so that willingness to allow ourselves to be coached by a peer who sees us starting to fall into the victim role is important. It's so that I can start to take into account, wow, yes, if I stay in this mindset, here's where this is going to lead.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest favors we can do for each other.
I noticed that we use a great example in the book of an African village where a baby showed up floating downstream, and they cared for it, and then another baby and another, and finally someone said, well, where are these babies coming from?
Right.
Let's go upstream and find out what the problem is.
Yeah, and far too often we deal with the emergency and don't go upstream to really find out what's the source.
And I love this example because using babies, that's obvious. You need to take care of a baby. You're not going to desert the baby while you trek upstream.
Right.
You're going to handle the emergency, put out the fire, take care of the urgent need, but not stop there. Also find out what's causing this.
So in the Chapter 7 Insights, where we do some comparing between surviving and thriving, there's a couple here that I think are really important. One is, first of all, failing to develop and sustain a vision. Mm-hmm. And the thriving side of that is remaining aware of our vision constantly, even while we're assessing.
Right. Doing both at the same time.
Yeah, that's a huge difference. The piece too that really stuck out for me here was being blind to what's going on. Right. The babies are coming through. We're ignoring it. The other one is developing and maintaining high situational awareness. Situational awareness is also recognizing the need to go upstream.
Well, and we would love you to exercise your situational awareness this week. Your assignment, if you choose to accept it, is to pick something in your life, some problem area that you've been addressing one way, and open to novelty. Ask what if, see if you can shift your mindset and deal with it in a different way.
Absolutely. And if you've got stories or comments, you can send them to thrivinginbusinessandlife@gmail.com. I'm Christopher Harding.
And I'm Will Wilkinson. We'll talk to you again next week.